The storm had come out of nowhere, turning the Colorado sky from pale blue to iron gray in what felt like moments. And when Clayton Irving found the woman collapsed against the trunk of a pine tree halfway up the mountain pass, her lips were turning the color of faded denim. He had been heading back to his cabin after checking his trap line when he spotted what he first thought was a fallen deer. Clayton dismounted from his horse, his boots crunching through the fresh powder, and realized with a jolt that it was a person. A woman. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had held it, spreading across the snow like spilled ink. Her clothes were all wrong for this weather. A thin traveling dress and a coat that might have been fine for a train journey but was useless against a Colorado blizzard. "Madam." He knelt beside her, pulling off his glove to check for a pulse at her throat. It was there, faint but steady. Her skin felt like ice. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. They were heavy with frost along the lashes. "Cold," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind. Clayton did not waste time with more questions. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was, and managed to get her draped across his saddle. She was conscious enough to hold on weakly while he mounted behind her, wrapping his coat around them both as best he could. The cabin was only another mile, but in this weather it might as well have been 10. The wind howled like something alive and angry as they made their slow progress. Clayton kept talking to her, nonsense mostly, just to keep her awake. "Almost there. Just hold on. You are going to be fine." He was not sure if he believed it, but he said it anyway. When the cabin finally came into view through the curtain of snow, relief flooded through him. He had built it himself 3 years ago when he decided to leave the chaos of the goldfields behind. It was small but solid, with thick walls and a good stone fireplace. He got the woman inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed, before rushing back out to stable his horse. By the time he returned, she had not moved. Her face was pale as the snow outside, and her breathing was shallow. Clayton had lived alone in these mountains long enough to know what frostbite looked like, and he checked her hands and feet with growing concern. Her fingers were white at the tips, and her feet were not much better. He needed to warm her slowly, carefully. He built up the fire until it roared, filling the small cabin with heat and light. Then he filled a basin with lukewarm water and began the careful work of warming her extremities. She whimpered when feeling started to return, a good sign even though it meant pain was coming back too. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, supporting her hand in the water. "But this means you still have feeling. That is good." Her eyes opened fully for the first time, and he saw they were a remarkable shade of green, like aspen leaves in summer. She looked at him with confusion and something that might have been fear. "Where am I?" "My cabin. About 8 miles outside Sierra City, Colorado. I am Clayton Irving. I found you in the snow." "Olivia," she said after a moment. "Olivia Morgan." She tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Clayton caught her shoulder, steadying her. "Easy. You have been out in the cold too long. You need to rest." "I do not have anywhere to rest." Her voice cracked, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "The stage. There was an accident. We hit something and I was thrown clear, but the driver, he just kept going. I think he did not realize. I tried to follow the road, but then the snow came and I could not see anything." Clayton felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of a stage driver leaving a passenger behind, but he pushed it down. What mattered now was getting her well. "You are safe now. That is what matters." "I cannot pay you." She said it flatly, looking down at her hands in the basin. "I have nothing. My bags were on the stage and I do not even know where it went. I did not ask you to pay me. Everyone wants something." There was a bitterness in her voice that spoke of hard experience. Clayton changed the water, making it slightly warmer. "Where were you heading?" "Sierra City. I was going to be a teacher." They advertised back in Philadelphia for someone willing to come west. I sold everything I had for the train ticket and the stage fare." She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "I suppose that position will be filled by someone else now." "Maybe not." Storm like this, the stage might not have made it through either. Could be delayed for days. Hope flickered across her face, then died. "Even if it is not, I have nowhere to stay, no money for a hotel. I cannot very well show up for a teaching position looking like I have been dragged through a snowdrift." They sat in silence for a moment, only the crackling of the fire filling the space. Clayton studied her profile in the firelight. She had a straight nose and a determined chin, and even exhausted and half frozen, there was a dignity about her that he respected. "I will cook for you if you let me stay," Olivia said suddenly, turning to look at him directly. "Until I can get to town and sort things out, I am a good cook. My mother ran a boarding house and I learned from her. I can earn my keep." Clayton considered this. He had been living on game meat and whatever he could cobble together for 3 years. His idea of cooking was not burning something over the fire. The offer was tempting, but he hesitated because having a woman here alone with him could damage her reputation before she even reached town. "People might talk," he said carefully. "You being here alone with me, people will talk no matter what I do. At least this way I will have a roof over my head while they do it." She lifted her chin. "Unless you are the kind of man I need to worry about. No, madam. Then I do not care what people say. I need somewhere to stay and you look like you could use a decent meal. We both benefit." He found himself nodding. "All right then, but you take the bed, I will sleep near the fire." Relief washed over her features, making her look younger. He realized she could not be much past 20. "Thank you, Mr. Irving. Clayton is fine." That first night, she slept the sleep of the truly exhausted while Clayton sat by the fire, keeping it fed and wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. He was 32 years old and had come to these mountains to escape complications. He liked the simplicity of his life, the quiet rhythm of the seasons, the solitude. Now he had a woman in his cabin, a woman with green eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw, and he suspected his simple life was about to become decidedly more complex. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Olivia woke slowly, disoriented until memory returned. She sat up and found Clayton at the table, cleaning his rifle. "How do you feel?" he asked. She took inventory. Her fingers and toes ached fiercely and her whole body felt bruised, but she was alive and warm. "Better. Sore, but better. Can you walk?" She tried standing, wobbling a bit but managing it. "Yes." "Good. Let me see your fingers and toes again." She sat at the table and let him examine her extremities in the morning light. The skin was red and tender, but the deathly white was gone. Clayton nodded, satisfied. "You were lucky. Another hour out there and you would have lost fingers for sure." "I know." She pulled her hands back, tucking them into her lap. "Thank you for finding me. Anyone would have done the same, maybe, but you were the one who did." She looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was small but well made, everything neat and in its place. There was a wood stove for cooking, shelves with supplies, hooks for hanging things, a table and 2 chairs, and the bed she had slept in. "You said something about me cooking." Clayton gestured to the stove and the various supplies. "I have got flour, salt, some dried beans, cornmeal. There is a root cellar outside with potatoes and turnips, venison in the smokehouse, not much else." Olivia stood and went to examine the supplies, her movements careful but determined. "I can work with this. When did you last have bread?" "Real bread, maybe a year ago. Then I will start there." She began gathering what she needed, and Clayton watched with fascination as she moved around his kitchen like she was learning a new dance. Her hands were still tender. He could tell by the way she winced when she kneaded the dough, but she did not complain. While the bread was rising, she made coffee and heated up some of the venison with wild onions she found in his stores. The smell alone made Clayton's mouth water. When she finally set a plate in front of him, he ate with the single-minded focus of a man who had forgotten what real cooking tasted like. "This is good," he said, and she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely. "Wait until you taste the bread." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. The snow was too deep for either of them to make it to town safely, so they were stuck together whether they liked it or not. Clayton found he liked it more than he had expected. Olivia was quiet in the mornings but became more talkative as the day went on. She told him about Philadelphia, about growing up in her mother's boarding house where she had learned to cook for crowds and manage accounts and deal with all manner of difficult people. Why leave all that? Clayton asked one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "My mother died last year. Influenza. The boarding house went to my uncle and he made it clear I was not needed. He wanted to put his own wife in charge." She stared into the flames. "I could have found work in Philadelphia, but I wanted something different, something mine. Teaching seemed like a way to build a new life. You will be a good teacher. How do you know you are patient? I have seen it the way you handle things, the way you explain when I ask about cooking. That takes patience." She looked at him curiously. "What about you? What brought you up here?" Clayton was quiet for a long moment. He did not talk about his past much, but something about the firelight and the snow outside and her open expression made him want to share. "I was in the war. Came back and things just felt wrong, like nothing fit anymore. Tried working in Denver for a while, but the crowds and noise made me feel crazy. Met a trapper who told me about these mountains and I came up to see. Never left. You get lonely. Sometimes. But lonely felt better than feeling wrong all the time." He paused. "Until lately." "What changed lately?" He met her eyes across the fire. "I found a half-frozen woman in the snow and she started filling my cabin with the smell of fresh bread." Olivia blushed and looked down at her hands, but she was smiling. Clayton felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. It was dangerous, he knew. She was planning to leave as soon as the snow cleared enough. She had a life waiting for her in Sierra City, a purpose. He was just a stopover, a temporary shelter from the storm, but knowing that did not stop his heart from beating a little faster when she smiled. A week after the storm, the weather finally broke enough for travel. Clayton saddled his horse and rode down to Sierra City to send word about Olivia and to check on the stage situation. The town was a rough collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside, born from silver mining and sustained by the constant flow of hopeful prospectors and the people who made their living off them. The stage office was run by a harried man named Pete who barely looked up when Clayton asked about the missing passenger. "Yeah," the driver reported it. Said he thought everyone got back on after they hit that rock, but when he got to town, he realized he was short one. "We sent someone back to look but could not find anything in all that snow. Figured she was dead." "She is not dead. She is at my cabin." Pete finally looked up, his eyebrows rising. "Well, I will be. That is good news then. Her bags are here. We held on to them just in case." Clayton collected the bags and then stopped by the general store to pick up a few supplies. Sarah Chen, who ran the store, gave him a knowing look when he bought tea and hairpins along with his usual order. "Heard you have a guest, Clayton." News traveled fast in small towns. "The woman from the stage. She was stranded, and she is still at your cabin. Roads were not clear enough for her to come down safely. They are clear enough now." Clayton met her gaze steadily. Sarah had always been fair with him, never judging, and he appreciated that. She is helping with the cooking in exchange for room and board until she can get settled. The teaching position is still open, Sarah said, her tone softening. School board has been waiting to see if she turned up. You tell Miss Morgan to come see Reverend Matthews when she is ready. He is heading up the search for a teacher. I will tell her. On his way out of town, Clayton stopped at the church and found Reverend Matthews, a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened to Clayton's explanation and nodded thoughtfully. I am glad she survived. The Lord watches over fools and travelers, and sometimes they are the same thing. He smiled. Have her come down when she is able. We will need to conduct an interview, of course, but if she is qualified and willing, the position is hers. We are desperate enough not to be particular. Clayton rode back up the mountain with Olivia's bags secured behind his saddle and news that should have made him happy. She could start her new life. She could leave his cabin and become the person she had traveled all this way to be. Instead, he felt a growing sense of loss that he did not want to examine too closely. Olivia was hanging laundry when he arrived, sheets and shirts flapping in the cold wind. She had found his washtub and put it to use, apparently. Her face lit up when she saw him, then grew even brighter when she spotted her bags. You found them. Stage office had them. They thought you were dead. She took the bags from him, hugging them like old friends. Thank you for going all the way down there. You did not have to do that. Also talk to the Reverend. The teaching job is still available if you want it. He said to come down when you are ready for an interview. Her expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for him to read. Oh, that is wonderful news. Yeah. They stood there in the snow, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, Olivia cleared her throat. I should probably go down tomorrow then. No sense in delaying, probably smart. Unless you still need help with the cooking. She said it lightly, but there was something hopeful in her eyes. Clayton knew what he should say. He should tell her to go to take the job to start her new life. Instead, he found himself saying, I would not say no to a few more of those biscuits you made yesterday. Her smile was like sunshine. Then I will stay a little longer, just until you get tired of my cooking. That night, Olivia opened her bags and sorted through her belongings, relieved to find everything intact. She had 2 more dresses, a warm cloak, her teaching certificates, and a bundle of letters from the school board in Sierra City. She also had the small wooden box that held her mother's wedding ring and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. She looked at the image for a long time, at her mother's young face and her father's serious expression. He had died when Olivia was 5, kicked by a horse and gone before the doctor could arrive. Her mother had raised her alone, built a life from nothing, and taught her daughter to do the same. I hope I am making you proud, Mama, she whispered, talking to yourself. She turned to find Clayton watching her from his seat by the fire. Just to my mother, or her memory anyway. Tell me about her. So she did. She told him about Margaret Morgan, who had turned grief into action and built a boarding house that was known for its good food and clean rooms. Who had taught her daughter to read and write and figure, who had scrimped and saved to make sure Olivia had opportunities she herself never had. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Clayton said when she finished. She was. I wish you could have met her. I wish I could have too. They talked deep into the night, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Olivia learned that Clayton had a sister in St. Louis he had not seen in 8 years, that he had worked as a carpenter before the war, that he could play the harmonica though he had not touched one in years. Clayton learned that Olivia loved books but had only been able to keep a few when she sold her things, that she was terrified of horses after being thrown as a child, that she wanted to see the ocean someday. Why did you really come west? Clayton asked finally. The truth. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Because in Philadelphia, I was always going to be poor Olivia Morgan, whose mother ran a boarding house. People were kind enough, but there was a ceiling to what I could become, what I could do. Out here, I thought maybe I could just be Olivia Morgan, teacher. I could make myself into whoever I wanted to be. And now I am not sure who I want to be anymore. She looked at him across the fire. These past few days have been the happiest I can remember in a long time. That probably sounds foolish. No, Clayton said quietly. It does not sound foolish at all. The next morning, Olivia dressed in her best dress and prepared to ride down to Sierra City. Clayton saddled his horse and helped her mount, teaching her the basics of sitting properly and holding the reins. She was nervous, he could tell, but she was also determined. The ride down was slow and careful. Clayton kept his horse to a walk and stayed close beside her, ready to help if she panicked. But Olivia, for all her fear, kept her composure. Her hands were tight on the saddle horn and her face was pale, but she did not ask to stop or turn back. You are doing fine, he told her. Just keep breathing. I am breathing. I am just not enjoying it. He found himself grinning. Fair enough. Sierra City looked different in the daylight without a blizzard obscuring it. Olivia saw the rough buildings and the muddy streets and the men who stopped to stare as they rode past. She lifted her chin and stared straight ahead, refusing to show any uncertainty. Clayton led her to the church, a small white building that was probably the newest structure in town. Reverend Matthews came out to greet them, his face kind and welcoming. Miss Morgan, I am so glad you made it safely. Please, come inside where it is warm. Olivia dismounted with Clayton's help and followed the Reverend inside. Clayton stayed with the horses, giving them privacy for the interview. He told himself he was just being polite, but the truth was he did not want to hear her commit to staying in Sierra City. He did not want to hear her make plans that did not include his cabin and his fire and his table. An hour later, Olivia emerged looking flushed and excited. He offered me the position. I start in 2 weeks after they finish building the schoolhouse. They have been holding classes in the church, but the new building should be ready soon. That is wonderful, Clayton said, and he meant it even as his heart sank. I am happy for you. He also told me about a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. She has a room available. He said he would introduce me. They walked the horses down the street to a tidy building with a painted sign that read Fletcher's boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a spry woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Olivia up and down and apparently liked what she saw. Reverend Matthews vouches for you, so that is good enough for me. Room is $3 a week, includes breakfast and supper. You do your own laundry, and I will have no entertaining of gentlemen callers in the rooms. Parlor only and only until 9 o'clock. That sounds perfect, madam. When do you want to move in? Olivia glanced at Clayton and he saw uncertainty in her eyes. I suppose as soon as possible would make the most sense. Tomorrow, then, Mrs. Fletcher said. I will have the room ready. They left the boarding house and walked through town in silence. Clayton pointed out the general store, the assayer's office, the saloon that she should probably avoid, and the small restaurant run by a Chinese family that made the best noodles he had ever tasted. It is not much of a town, he said. It is perfect. It is mine, or it will be. Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him. Clayton, I cannot thank you enough for everything you have done. You saved my life and you gave me shelter and you brought me here. I will never forget your kindness. You paid for your keep with the best meals I have had in years. I should be thanking you, still. She reached out and touched his arm, and even through his coat he felt the warmth of her hand. Thank you. They rode back up to the cabin in silence, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Olivia went inside to pack her belongings while Clayton tended to the horse. He took longer than necessary, not ready to face the reality of her leaving. When he finally came inside, he found her sitting at the table, her bags packed and ready by the door. She had made supper, one last meal of venison stew and fresh bread. They ate quietly, neither of them seeming to know what to say. "I will miss this," Olivia said finally. "The quiet, the peace. Town is not that far. You can visit if you want quiet." "Can I?" She looked at him directly. "Would that be all right? If I came to visit sometimes? I would like that." The words came out rougher than he intended, weighted with more meaning than they should have carried. That night, Olivia slept in the bed for the last time while Clayton kept his usual spot by the fire. But neither of them slept much. Clayton could hear her shifting and turning, and he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how his cabin had come to feel so empty when she was still in it. Morning came too soon. Clayton saddled the horse while Olivia did a final check of the cabin, making sure she had not forgotten anything. She paused at the door, looking back at the small space that had been her refuge. "I am going to miss this place," she said softly. "It will still be here." The ride down to Sierra City felt twice as long as the day before and half as pleasant. When they reached Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, Clayton helped Olivia down and carried her bags to the door. Mrs. Fletcher appeared and whisked Olivia inside to see her room, leaving Clayton standing in the street feeling lost. Olivia came back out a few minutes later. "Mrs. Fletcher says the room is lovely. There is even a writing desk." "That is good. You can prepare your lessons there." "Yes." She twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture he had come to recognize. "When will I see you again?" "I come to town for supplies every couple of weeks. I will stop by and see how you are settling in." "I would like that very much." They stood there, neither wanting to be the one to say goodbye. Finally, Clayton cleared his throat. "I should head back, getting late." "Of course. Thank you again for everything." He mounted his horse and turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her. She was standing in front of the boarding house, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, watching him go. Something in her expression made him remember the way she had looked in the snow, half frozen and alone. "Olivia." "Yes, I am glad I found you." Her smile was tremulous but real. "So am I." The ride back up the mountain was the loneliest Clayton had felt in years. The cabin, when he reached it, was exactly as he had left it that morning, but it felt different now. The bed was empty. The table was set for one. The silence that had once been peaceful now felt oppressive. He tried to settle into his old routine. He checked his trapline, cut firewood, and hunted. He cooked simple meals that tasted like dust and ate them alone. At night, he sat by the fire and tried to read from his small collection of books, but the words would not stick. His mind kept wandering to a boarding house in Sierra City, and a woman with green eyes who had turned his world upside down in the space of 2 weeks. Down in Sierra City, Olivia was discovering that starting a new life was harder than she had imagined. Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house was comfortable enough, and the other residents were polite if not particularly friendly. But Olivia felt adrift in a way she had not experienced at Clayton's cabin. The schoolhouse was finished ahead of schedule, and she threw herself into preparing for her first day of teaching. She met her students, a mixed group of 12 children ranging from 6 to 14. They were rough around the edges, these mountain children, but eager to learn. She organized her classroom, planned her lessons, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. 2 weeks turned into 3, then 4. Clayton did not come to town. Olivia told herself it was because of the weather, or because he was busy with his trapline, or a dozen other reasonable explanations. She tried not to feel disappointed, but she failed. She was walking back from the general store one afternoon when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Morgan." She turned to see Sarah Chen waving from the doorway of the store. Olivia walked back, curious. "I forgot to mention," Sarah said. "Clayton Irving was by yesterday. He asked me to give you this if I saw you." She handed Olivia a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, a beautiful edition of poetry by Walt Whitman. Tucked between the pages was a note in rough handwriting. "Thought you might like this. The supply wagon brought it in from Denver. Clayton." Olivia held the book to her chest, feeling something tight in her throat. He had thought of her. He had spent money he probably could not easily spare on a gift for her, and he had not even bothered to deliver it himself. "Is he well?" she asked Sarah, trying to sound casual. Sarah gave her a knowing look. "He is fine, I suppose. Looked a bit thinner than usual. I told him he should stick around for supper, but he said he needed to get back before dark." Olivia thanked her and walked back to the boarding house in a daze. That evening she sat at her writing desk and penned a letter. "Dear Clayton, thank you for the beautiful book. It was incredibly thoughtful, and I will treasure it. Whitman's words feel particularly fitting for this wild country we find ourselves in. Teaching is going well. The children are a joy, even when they are challenging. I think my mother would be proud to see me standing in front of a classroom. But I confess, I miss the quiet of the mountains. The town is so loud all the time, full of noise and people. I find myself thinking often of your cabin and the peace I found there. If you are amenable, I would very much like to visit on Sunday. It is my day off from teaching, and I have been practicing my riding. I believe I could manage the journey on my own if I could borrow a horse from the livery. I hope you are well and that you are eating better than you did before I arrived. With sincere gratitude and warm regards, Olivia Morgan." She left the letter at the general store with Sarah, who promised to make sure Clayton got it when he next came to town. Clayton found the letter waiting for him when he came down 3 days later. He read it standing in the general store, oblivious to Sarah's amused expression. When he finished, he read it again, his eyes lingering on certain phrases. "I miss the quiet of the mountains. I would very much like to visit." "You planning to stand there all day, or are you going to write her back?" Sarah asked. Clayton looked up, feeling his face heat. "I am not much for writing." "Then tell her in person. She wants to visit on Sunday." That Sunday, Clayton woke before dawn to clean the cabin. He scrubbed the table, swept the floor, and even aired out the quilts on the bed. He made sure there was plenty of firewood stacked and coffee ready to brew. Then he sat down to wait, feeling ridiculously nervous. She arrived around mid-morning, riding a gentle mare from the livery with obvious concentration. Clayton went out to meet her, and when she dismounted, she was grinning with pride. "I did it. I rode all the way up by myself. I can see that. I am impressed. I am impressed with myself." She laughed, and the sound filled the empty spaces in his chest that had been aching for weeks. "I have been practicing in the town, riding up and down the streets until people started to think I was crazy." He took the horse's reins and led it to the small shelter he used as a stable. When he turned back, Olivia was standing in the doorway of the cabin, looking in with an expression he could not quite read. "It looks the same," she said softly. "I was afraid it would have changed." "Why would it change?" "I do not know. Everything else has." She stepped inside and looked around, her eyes taking in every familiar detail. "May I make coffee? You do not have to ask. This is your home. I am a guest now." Something about that statement bothered him, but he could not articulate why. He watched as she moved around the kitchen with the ease of familiarity, making coffee and setting out the bread and cheese she had brought from town. They sat at the table together, and it felt so natural, so right. that Clayton felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. "Tell me about teaching," he said, needing to fill the silence before he said something foolish. Her face lit up as she talked about her students, about little Emma who was learning to read, about Tom who had a gift for numbers, about all the small victories and challenges of her days. Clayton listened and watched her animated expressions, thinking that he had never seen anyone love something as much as she loved teaching. "But enough about me," she said finally. "What have you been doing? How is the trap line? Good enough. Caught a few marten, some beaver. Prices are not great this year, but I am making do. Are you eating properly?" He hedged, not wanting to admit that he had been surviving on tough meat and burned cornmeal. "Well enough." She gave him a look that said she did not believe him for a second. "I brought supplies. Let me make a proper meal before I head back." "You do not have to do that. I want to." She was already standing, already gathering ingredients. "Besides, I have been craving the chance to cook on a real stove instead of Mrs. Fletcher's overcrowded kitchen. She has 5 other boarders, and we are all fighting for space." Clayton sat back and let her work, content to watch. She hummed as she cooked, a tuneless melody that made him smile. The cabin filled with good smells, and for a few hours, everything felt the way it had before she left. They ate together, talking easily about everything and nothing. But as the afternoon wore on, Clayton could feel the minutes slipping away. Soon she would have to leave to make it back to town before dark. Soon he would be alone again. "I should go," Olivia said finally, echoing his thoughts. But she made no move to stand. "Yeah, Clayton." She was looking down at her hands twisted together in her lap. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you not come to visit me? In town, I mean. You sent the book, which was lovely, but you did not come yourself." He was quiet for a long time, trying to find the right words. "I did not think I should." "Why not?" "Because you have a new life now, a good life. Teaching those kids, being part of the town. I am just a trapper who lives alone in the mountains. I did not want to complicate things for you." She looked up at him, and there were tears shining in her eyes. "You are not a complication, Clayton. You are the person who saved my life. You are my friend. At least I hope you are." "I am." The words came out hoarse. "Then why does it feel like you are trying to disappear from it?" "Because I am falling in love with you, and I do not have any right to. Because you deserve better than a broken-down soldier who hides in the mountains. Because every time I look at you, I want things I have no business wanting." He did not say any of that. Instead, he said, "I am not trying to disappear. I just thought you needed space to settle in." "What if I do not want space?" She stood up, agitated, and started pacing. "What if these past weeks have been miserable because the only place I felt truly at home was here, in this cabin with you?" Clayton stood too, his heart pounding. "Olivia, I know it is not proper for me to say these things. I know I am supposed to be grateful for the teaching position and happy with my nice room at the boarding house, and I am grateful, but I am not happy, Clayton. I have not been happy since I left here." He crossed the small space between them, unable to stop himself. "You have only been there a few weeks. Give it time. You will settle in." "What if I do not want to settle in?" She looked up at him, and he could see the fear and hope warring in her expression. "What if I want to come back here? You have a job. You have responsibilities. I could teach the children here. I could ride down a few times a week, or they could come up here. We could build a small schoolroom." "Olivia, you are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in weeks." She grabbed his arms, her fingers tight even through his shirt. "Clayton, please, tell me I am not alone in feeling this. Tell me these weeks have been as hard for you as they have been for me." He should lie. He should tell her he had barely noticed her absence, that he was fine alone, that she should go back to her sensible life in town and forget about the mountain man who had found her in the snow. But he had never been good at lying. "They have been hell," he admitted quietly. "Every day has been hell without you here." She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Then why are you pushing me away?" "Because you deserve more than this." He pulled back, gesturing around the small cabin. "You deserve a real life, a real future. Not hiding away on a mountain with someone like me." "Someone like you? You mean someone kind and thoughtful and good? Someone who reads poetry and builds beautiful cabins and saves foolish women from blizzards?" Her voice was fierce. "That is exactly the kind of someone I want." "You are not thinking about the reality. It is hard up here. Lonely. Cut off from everything. I grew up in a boarding house with people constantly around me, constant noise, constant demands. I have spent the last few weeks living in town with people everywhere, and I have never felt more lonely in my life." She stepped closer to him again. "The only time I have felt truly at peace was here with you." Clayton felt his resolve crumbling. "What about your teaching?" "I meant what I said. I could teach from here. Or I could find another way to use my skills. I could write, or I could help you with the trap line, or I could do 100 other things. The teaching was never the point. The point was building a life that was mine. And this feels like mine, Clayton. This cabin, these mountains, this feels like home in a way nothing else ever has." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because if you stay, if you choose this, I am not going to be able to let you go again." "Then do not let me go. Keep me here. Let me stay." He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when she pressed closer and wrapped her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more. All the loneliness of the past weeks, all the longing and fear and hope, poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "What are we going to do?" "I am going to ride back to town and give my notice to Reverend Matthews. I am going to pack my things and settle my account with Mrs. Fletcher. And then I am going to come back here if you will have me. If I will have you. Olivia, there is nothing I want more, but people will talk. Your reputation will survive. We can get married if you think that is best, or we can just live as we have been and people can think what they like." "I want to marry you," Clayton said firmly. "I want to do this right. I want everyone to know you chose to be here, that this is not some scandal but a choice you made freely." She smiled, brilliant and beautiful. "Then ask me properly." He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of his cabin, still holding her hand. "Olivia Morgan, will you marry me? Will you stay here in this cabin and let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" "Yes," she said, pulling him back to his feet so she could kiss him again. "Yes, absolutely yes." They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the pines outside. Finally, reluctantly, Olivia pulled back. "I really do need to get back before dark, but I will be back in a few days, a week at most. I need to settle everything properly." Clayton did not want to let her go, but he knew she was right. "I am riding down with you. I am not letting you make that trip alone." The ride to Sierra City was completely different from any of their previous journeys. They rode close together, stopping frequently to talk or simply to be near each other. By the time they reached town, the sun was setting and they were both giddy with happiness and plans. Clayton left her at the boarding house with a long kiss that made Mrs. Fletcher clear her throat loudly from the window. Olivia did not care. She floated into the house and up to her room, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The next morning, she went to see Reverend Matthews. He listened to her explanation with a grave expression, and she braced herself for condemnation. Instead, he smiled. "I had a feeling you would not last long in town, Miss Morgan. You had the look of someone who belonged to the wild country. You are not angry. Disappointed to lose a good teacher, yes. But I am happy to gain the opportunity to perform a wedding. I assume you will want me to marry you and Mr. Irving, if you would be willing. I would be honored. When were you thinking? As soon as possible. We have already waited long enough. They settled on the following Saturday, which gave Olivia time to pack her belongings and Clayton time to ride to the nearest town with a telegraph office to send word to his sister. Olivia wrote to a few friends in Philadelphia, not sure if they would respond, but wanting to share her news anyway. The days flew by in a flurry of activity. Sarah Chen at the general store helped Olivia pick out fabric for a simple wedding dress, and Mrs. Fletcher, once she understood the situation was respectable, offered to alter it for her. The other teachers in the territory sent a replacement to take over Olivia's classes, a young man fresh from Boston who looked terrified of the mountains. Clayton came to town 2 days before the wedding and stayed at the boarding house in a room separate from Olivia's, much to Mrs. Fletcher's approval. He seemed nervous, checking with Olivia multiple times to make sure she had not changed her mind. "I am not going to change my mind," she told him for the 3rd time as they walked through town together. "Clayton, I love you. I want to marry you. Please stop worrying. I just want to make sure you know what you are getting into. I am getting into a life with a good man who makes me happy. That is all I need to know." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, perfect December weather. Olivia dressed in her new dress, a simple blue wool that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Fletcher helped with her hair, pinning it up and weaving in ribbon. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. "Clayton Irving is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Olivia replied. The ceremony was held in the small church with a modest gathering of witnesses. Sarah Chen was there, along with Reverend Matthew's wife, and a few of the townspeople who had befriended Olivia during her brief time in Sierra City. Clayton stood at the altar in his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, looking so handsome that Olivia's breath caught. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed her with such tenderness that Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too." The small gathering celebrated with cake and coffee in the church hall, and then Clayton and Olivia climbed onto his horse together, her few belongings packed behind the saddle. As they rode out of Sierra City toward the mountains, Olivia looked back once at the town that had almost been her home. Then she turned forward toward the man beside her and the life ahead and did not look back again. The cabin was exactly as she remembered it, but somehow it felt different now. It was not just Clayton's cabin anymore. It was theirs, their home. That first night as husband and wife, they sat by the fire and talked about their plans. They would expand the cabin come spring, adding a room for when children came. Clayton would continue his trapping, but Olivia had an idea about starting a small business supplying baked goods to the general store in Sierra City. They could make trips down together, turn it into a social occasion rather than a chore. "We are going to have a good life here," Clayton said, pulling her close. "We already do," Olivia replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Winter deepened, and the newlyweds settled into their life together. Olivia had been right about her cooking skills. She started baking extra bread and pastries, and Clayton would take them to town to sell at the general store. They sold out immediately, and Sarah Chen started taking orders. Before long, Olivia had a steady business going. Clayton, for his part, had never been happier. Coming home from checking his trap line to find Olivia in the cabin, humming as she worked, felt like a miracle every single time. They talked for hours every evening, learning everything about each other. They made love with increasing confidence and joy, discovering the ways they fit together. Spring came gradually to the mountains, the snow melting in patches to reveal the brown earth beneath. As soon as the ground was workable, Clayton began the expansion on the cabin. Olivia helped when she could, holding boards steady while he hammered, mixing mortar, offering opinions on window placement. "We should put a window here," she said, pointing to the eastern wall of the new room. "So the morning light can come in." "Good idea." Clayton marked the spot. "Anything else?" "A bigger root cellar. If my baking business keeps growing, we are going to need more storage." "I will add it to the list." They worked together through the spring and into summer, expanding and improving their home. Neighbors from the scattered homesteads in the area would sometimes stop by, curious about the woman who had chosen to marry the hermit trapper. Olivia welcomed them all with coffee and fresh baked goods, slowly building a community where before there had been only isolation. In June, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be sure before telling Clayton. When she finally did over breakfast one morning, he went completely still. "A baby," he said, his voice strange. "Yes, in the winter, probably January or February." She watched his face anxiously, unable to read his expression. "Clayton, are you all right?" He stood abruptly and came around the table, pulling her into his arms. "I am better than all right. I am terrified and thrilled, and I love you so much." She laughed, relief flooding through her. "I am terrified too, but we will figure it out together." "Together," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Olivia continued her baking business until she grew too large and tired, then reluctantly took a break. Clayton became increasingly protective, insisting on doing all the heavy work around the cabin and worrying whenever she so much as frowned. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he tried to prevent her from lifting a pot of stew. "I know. I just want you to be safe." "We are safe, both of us." She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Feel that. That is a strong, healthy baby who cannot wait to meet you." Clayton's face softened with wonder as he felt his child move under his palm. "That is amazing." "That is our baby." As Olivia's due date approached, they made preparations. Clayton rode to Sierra City and convinced the town's midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Sullivan, to come stay at the cabin for a few weeks. He stocked extra firewood and supplies, preparing for the possibility of being snowed in. Olivia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with nervous energy. The baby decided to arrive on a bitter cold night in early February, 3 weeks before the expected date. Olivia woke Clayton in the dark hours before dawn, gripping his hand hard. "It is time." Mrs. Sullivan took charge immediately, shooing Clayton out of the bedroom and setting up everything she needed. Clayton paced the main room of the cabin, listening to Olivia's laboring cries and feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. Hours passed. The sun rose and set. Mrs. Sullivan came out periodically to get water or supplies, assuring Clayton that everything was progressing normally, but he could hear the strain in Olivia's voice and it tore at him. "Can I see her?" he asked during one of the midwife's trips out. "Not yet. She is concentrating." "But she is doing wonderfully. She is strong, your wife." Finally, as the moon rose high and silver over the snow-covered mountains, a baby's cry split the night. Clayton froze, his heart hammering. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Irving. You have a son." Clayton rushed past her into the bedroom. Olivia was propped up against the pillows, exhausted and sweat-soaked and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced bundle that was wailing lustily. "Clayton," she said, her voice hoarse but filled with joy. "Come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. When he looked down at the baby in Olivia's arms, he felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This tiny person with his wrinkled face and dark hair was his son. His and Olivia's. "Can I hold him?" "Of course." Olivia carefully transferred the baby to Clayton's arms, showing him how to support the head. "He is perfect, is he not?" "He is." Clayton could barely speak past the lump in his throat. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Clayton knew. "What about James, after your father?" Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "James Irving, it is perfect, Mrs. Sullivan stayed for another week, teaching Olivia about nursing and helping her recover her strength. Clayton hovered anxiously, wanting to help but not sure how. He changed diapers and walked the floor with James when he cried, singing old songs he remembered from his own childhood in a rough voice that somehow soothed the baby. "You are a natural father," Olivia told him one night as she watched him rock their son. "I am terrified I am going to break him." "You will not. Look how gentle you are." Winter gradually loosened its grip, and spring returned to the mountains. Olivia regained her strength and began baking again, working around James's schedule. Clayton's sister finally wrote back, thrilled about the marriage and the baby, saying she hoped to visit in the summer. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and louder than before but infinitely richer. James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, alert baby who smiled at his parents and grabbed at everything within reach. Olivia and Clayton marveled over every milestone, every new development. On their first anniversary, Clayton gave Olivia a rocking chair he had made himself, carving their initials and James's into the back. Olivia gave him a journal bound in leather, the first pages already filled with her careful handwriting documenting their first year together. "I wanted to make sure we remember everything," she said as he paged through it. "All the little moments that make up our life. It is perfect. You are perfect." He set the journal aside and pulled her close. "This whole year has been perfect. Even the parts where I was huge and cranky and could not see my own feet. Especially those parts." They laughed together, and James, sitting on a blanket nearby, laughed too, even though he had no idea what was funny. The sound of their laughter filled the cabin and spilled out into the spring evening, a testament to the life they had built together. Clayton's sister, Margaret, arrived in July with her husband and 2 daughters. The cabin was suddenly overflowing with people and noise and activity. Margaret embraced Olivia like a long-lost sister, thanking her for making Clayton happy. "He was so lost after the war," she confided one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching the children play. "I worried he would never find his way back to himself, but you brought him back." "He saved me first," Olivia replied, "found me in the snow and gave me a place to belong. It seems like you saved each other then." The visit lasted 2 weeks, and by the end both families were sad to part. But they made promises to visit again, to stay in touch, to be the family both Clayton and Olivia had been missing for so long. As the years passed, the cabin continued to grow. Another room was added when Olivia became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Margaret after Clayton's sister. Then came another son, Thomas, and finally another daughter, Sarah, named for their friend at the general store. The cabin that had once housed one lonely man now rang with the sounds of children laughing and arguing and playing. Olivia's baking business had expanded to include 3 general stores in different mining towns, and Clayton had transitioned from trapping to guiding, taking wealthy Easterners on hunting trips through the mountains. They were not rich, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. On a cold evening in December, nearly 10 years after Clayton had found Olivia in the snow, they sat together on the porch wrapped in a quilt while the children slept inside. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the winter air. "You ever regret it?" Clayton asked. "Giving up teaching, staying here instead of having a life in town?" Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not once," she said finally. "This is exactly the life I was meant to have. These mountains, this cabin, you, our children. This is home." "I ask because Sarah Chen mentioned the school board is looking for someone to train new teachers. It would be good money, and you could do it from here. Teachers could come up for a week at a time and you could teach them your methods. Did you talk to her about this?" "I might have mentioned you have been thinking about teaching again now that the kids are older." Olivia turned to look at him in the darkness. "Have I been thinking that? You always loved teaching. I thought maybe you missed it." She considered this. It was true that she sometimes felt the pull of her old profession, the desire to shape young minds and help them grow. But the thought of leaving her family for extended periods did not appeal. "What if I did it differently?" she said slowly. "What if we built a small schoolhouse here and offered lessons to the children in the area a few days a week? Not as my job, but as a service to the community. There must be a dozen families within riding distance who would benefit." Clayton smiled. "I think that is a wonderful idea. We could build it in the spring, near the creek where the land flattens out. The children could help. James is old enough to learn carpentry from you." They sat in comfortable silence, planning and dreaming the way they had since the beginning. Inside, they could hear one of the children calling out in their sleep, and Olivia started to rise. "I will go," Clayton said, standing. "You stay and enjoy the quiet." He disappeared inside, and Olivia heard him murmuring softly to whichever child had woken. She looked out at the mountains, dark shadows against the star-filled sky, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had come west looking for a new life, for a chance to be someone different. She had found that and so much more. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to protect her, to cherish her, to build a life with her. Clayton returned and settled back beside her, pulling the quilt around them both. "Sarah is fine, just a bad dream." "Our Sarah, or Sarah Chen. Our Sarah. Though Sarah Chen wants to know if we are coming to town for Christmas this year. We should. The children would love it, and we could deliver the Christmas baking orders in person." They made plans, comfortable in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and true. The cabin that had once sheltered a woman from a storm now sheltered an entire family. The mountains that had seemed so wild and lonely now felt like protection, cradling them in their ancient embrace. As winter deepened and Christmas approached, the Irving family prepared for their trip to Sierra City. It would be the first time all the children had gone to town together, and there was great excitement about seeing the decorated storefronts and attending the Christmas service at the church where their parents had married. The journey down was slow with 4 children in tow, but they made it safely. The town had grown in the 10 years since Olivia had first arrived, with new buildings and new families, but many of the old faces remained. Sarah Chen greeted them warmly at the general store, exclaiming over how much the children had grown. Reverend Matthews, now grayer but still kind, welcomed them to church. Mrs. Fletcher had passed away 2 years earlier, but her daughter had taken over the boarding house and remembered Olivia fondly. "My mother always said you made the right choice, marrying that mountain man. She admired your courage." After church on Christmas Eve, as they walked through the snow-covered streets with the children running ahead, Clayton took Olivia's hand. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly. You, more than I ever thought possible. He pulled her close as they walked. When I found you in that snow 10 years ago, I thought I was just helping a stranger. I had no idea I was finding the rest of my life. I used to wonder what would have happened if you had not found me that day. If you had taken a different route, or if the storm had been worse, or any number of other things. But I did find you. You did, and I found you. She squeezed his hand, and we found this life together. James ran back to them, his cheeks red with cold and excitement. Papa, can we go see the Christmas tree in the town square? Please, of course. Everyone to the town square. The family moved together through the festive streets, surrounded by the glow of lanterns and the sound of carols. Later that night, back in their rented rooms at the boarding house, with the children finally asleep and exhausted from the excitement, Clayton and Olivia sat together by the window looking out at the snow. 10 years, Olivia said softly. It feels like yesterday and forever all at once. We have lived a lot of life in those 10 years, and we have so much more ahead of us. James wants to learn trapping from you. Margaret is already asking about helping with the baking business. Thomas and Sarah are still small, but they will grow so fast. Just like we will grow old together, watching them build their own lives. Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. I cannot think of anything I want more. They returned to the cabin after Christmas, laden with gifts and full of memories. The new year arrived with fresh snow and new possibilities. True to their plans, they began work on the small schoolhouse in early spring. It was a community effort, with neighboring families helping with the construction in exchange for the promise of education for their children. By summer, the schoolhouse was complete, a simple building with windows on 3 sides to let in light and a small stove for warmth. Olivia stood inside it on the day before the first lessons were to begin, feeling a familiar thrill of anticipation. Ready for tomorrow? Clayton asked, coming to stand beside her. I think so. 8 students to start with, ranging from 6 to 12. It is a good size for beginning. You are going to be wonderful. The schoolhouse became a hub for the scattered mountain community. 3 days a week, children would ride or walk to the Irving property for lessons. On the other days, Olivia worked on her baking and managed the household while the children helped with various tasks. It was a full life, sometimes overwhelming in its demands, but deeply satisfying. Olivia and Clayton had built not just a home but a legacy. Their children were growing up strong and capable, learning from both parents and contributing to the family enterprise. James, at 14, was already an accomplished trapper and hunter, often accompanying his father on trips. Margaret, 12, had taken over much of the day-to-day baking operations, freeing Olivia to focus on teaching. Thomas and Sarah, 10 and 8 respectively, helped where they could and attended their mother's school with enthusiasm. One evening in late summer, as the family sat around the dinner table sharing the events of their day, Clayton looked around at the faces of his wife and children and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what he had been searching for during all those years of wandering after the war. This sense of purpose, of belonging, of love. What are you thinking about? Olivia asked, catching his expression. Just how lucky I am, how grateful. We are all lucky, Margaret said. Sarah Chen told me today that we have the best family in the whole territory. Sarah Chen is a wise woman, Olivia replied with a smile. She also said that Papa found Mama in the snow and saved her life, and that is the most romantic story she has ever heard. Is that true? Clayton and Olivia exchanged glances, both remembering that day. It is true, Clayton said. Your Mama was half frozen under a pine tree and I brought her here to warm up. And then Mama said she would cook for you if you let her stay, Thomas added, and you fell in love and got married. That is a very simplified version, Olivia laughed. But yes, essentially that is what happened. Will you tell us the whole story? Sarah asked. Please. So they did, taking turns sharing the details of those early days. The children listened with rapt attention, asking questions and exclaiming over various parts. When the story was finished, James looked thoughtful. So if Papa had not found you, none of us would exist. That is a sobering thought, Margaret agreed. But he did find me, Olivia said firmly. And we are all here together. That is what matters. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the milestones of growing children. James left home at 18 to work as a guide like his father, based out of a town to the north. Margaret married at 20 to a young doctor who set up practice in Sierra City, and they visited often with their growing family. Thomas showed an unexpected aptitude for drawing and painting, and through connections Sarah Chen made, he was able to study with an artist in Denver. Sarah, the youngest, proved to have her mother's gift for teaching and took over running the mountain school when Olivia decided to retire at 50. Clayton and Olivia, their hair graying and their faces lined with years of mountain sun and wind, settled into a quieter rhythm. They still worked, but at a gentler pace. They spent long evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the peaks and talking about everything and nothing. You remember that first night? Olivia asked one summer evening, nearly 30 years after they had met. When you brought me here and I was so cold I could barely speak. I remember thinking you were going to die if I did not get you warm. I remember being terrified. I remember opening my eyes and seeing you, and even though I was half frozen and lost, I felt safe. She reached for his hand. I have felt safe every day since. You made me want to be part of the world again. Before you came, I was just existing up here. After you came, I was living. They sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The cabin behind them was quiet now. No children running through its rooms, but it still felt full. Full of memories, of love, of the life they had built together. In the fall of their 32nd year together, Sarah came to visit with news. There is a journalist from New York who wants to write about the mountain schools of Colorado. I told him about ours, about how Mama started it, and he wants to interview you both. Olivia looked at Clayton uncertainly. They had always been private people, content with their small corner of the world. I do not know if we want that kind of attention. It could help other communities start their own schools, Sarah argued. Show them what is possible. In the end, they agreed. The journalist, a young man named David Carpenter, arrived in late September and spent a week at the cabin. He interviewed Olivia and Clayton separately and together, asking about their lives and their philosophy of education and community building. What made you stay? He asked Olivia during one session. You came west to be a teacher in town, but you gave that up to live here. Was it difficult? Olivia thought for a moment before answering. I did not give anything up. I changed my path, yes, but I gained so much more than I lost. I found love, built a family, and still managed to teach and make a difference in my own way. Some people would say I sacrificed my career, but I would say I created something better than a career. I created a life. The article was published in Harper's Weekly the following spring and created a small sensation. Letters arrived from women across the country, asking for advice about starting their own mountain schools or sharing their own stories of building unconventional lives in the West. Olivia answered each one personally, encouraging and advising. Clayton teased her about becoming a celebrity, but he was proud of her and the recognition she was receiving. More years passed. Grandchildren were born and grew. Clayton and Olivia celebrated their 40th anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin. It was a tight squeeze, with people sleeping on every available surface, but the joy and noise and chaos was exactly what they both wanted. On the actual day of their anniversary, Clayton took Olivia on a ride up into the mountains, to the place where he had found her all those years ago. The pine tree was still there, though much larger now. They stood beneath its branches, looking out at the view. "I have loved you for 40 years," Clayton said, taking both her hands in his, "and I will love you for however many more we have." "I used to think I came west to find myself," Olivia replied. "But really, I came west to find you, to find us." They kissed beneath the pine tree, two people in their 60s who had built a life from a chance encounter in a snowstorm. When they rode back to the cabin, their family was waiting with food and music and love. The celebration lasted into the night, with stories shared and memories recalled. Their oldest grandchild, James's son, asked Clayton to tell the story of how he found Grandma in the snow one more time. "You have heard that story 100 times," Clayton protested. "But it is the best story," the boy insisted. "Tell it again." So Clayton told it again, with Olivia adding details and corrections, and their family listened as if hearing it for the first time. Because it was not just a story about a man finding a woman in the snow. It was the story of how their family began, how love grew in the most unexpected place, how two people built something lasting and true from a single moment of kindness. When the story was finished, there was a moment of quiet, and then someone started singing. Soon everyone joined in, their voices filling the cabin and spilling out into the mountain night. Clayton and Olivia sat together in the middle of it all, surrounded by the legacy of their love, and knew they had lived a good life. They had many more good years together, watching their grandchildren grow and even welcoming a few great-grandchildren. They slowed down gradually, their steps less sure and their bodies less strong, but their love never wavered. Clayton passed away on a quiet spring morning in his 80th year, with Olivia holding his hand and their children gathered around. He went peacefully, slipping away like someone settling into sleep. His last words were to Olivia, "Thank you for staying." "Thank you for finding me," she whispered back. Olivia lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by family and sustained by memories. She still lived in the cabin, though Sarah had moved in to help her. On the evening of what would have been their 55th anniversary, she sat on the porch watching the sun set and felt Clayton's presence so strongly it was almost physical. That night, she went to sleep in the bed they had shared for over 50 years and did not wake up. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, with a faint smile on her face. They buried her beside Clayton on the hillside overlooking the cabin, under the whispering pines. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testifying to the impact Olivia and Clayton Irving had made on the mountains and the people who called them home. Their cabin still stands, maintained by the family, and used as a gathering place for reunions and celebrations. The schoolhouse Olivia founded operates still, now in its 5th generation of teachers, all descended from or trained by someone she taught. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow falls thick and fast, people say you can still feel the love that two people built in that small cabin. A love that started with a simple offer, "I will cook for you if you let me stay," and grew into something that lasted beyond their lifetimes, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the choice to build a life together.